The night the fire came, Pine Valley slept under a curtain of thunderclouds. The only ones awake were a man, his dog, and a storm waiting to be born. Officer Daniel Ward had worked countless late shifts, but this one felt different. The air restless, the trees whispering warnings, and Rex, his German shepherd partner, couldn't stop pacing. Then, through the static of the radio, came nothing. Only silence. Until Rex froze, nose lifting to the wind. Smoke. Minutes later they found the house. It wasn't just burning. It was collapsing. And at its door stood a 6-year-old girl, barefoot in the rain, shielding a crying baby from the fire's breath. When Daniel carried them out, the world exploded behind him. A wave of heat, light, and memory. Because years ago, he'd failed to save another little girl from another fire. This time, he wouldn't. The night air in Pine Valley hung heavy, almost alive. Moisture clung to the asphalt, carrying the scent of pine sap and distant rain. Officer Daniel Ward eased his cruiser along the narrow service road that snaked between the woods, headlights sliding over silver trunks slick with humidity. Inside the vehicle, the radio murmured the low static of a dispatcher bored by quiet. Daniel didn't mind the silence. After 8 years on the force, he had learned to treasure the still nights, the ones when trouble felt like a rumor rather than a promise. Beside him sat Rex, his German shepherd partner, muscles coiled beneath his dark coat, amber eyes following every ripple of movement outside the window. The dog's breath fogged the glass, ears flicking in rhythm with the chirr of crickets. Daniel reached over, absently rubbing the thick fur between Rex's shoulders. "Easy, boy," he said under his breath. "Long shift's almost over." Thunder rolled far off in the hills, low and restless. Lightning flared once, brief, white, and far away, like a camera flash against the sky. Daniel exhaled and pressed on, tires humming. He should have felt at peace, but a weight lived inside him tonight, an echo from another fire long ago, the night his little sister hadn't made it out. He never spoke of it, but every smoky whiff, every siren in the dark, lit the memory again. Rex's sudden growl broke the trance, a deep vibration, low and warning. His nose lifted, the muscles along his neck stiffened. Daniel's hand froze on the wheel. "What is it?" Then he smelled it too. Smoke. Faint but real, curling through the damp air with the bitter edge of burning wood. The dog barked once, sharp and commanding. Daniel's pulse kicked. He flicked on the high beams. Through the trees, beyond a dip in the road, a weak orange shimmer licked at the dark. For an instant he thought it was heat lightning reflecting off the clouds, but then the shimmer moved, pulsing, alive. He hit the accelerator. Gravel spat under the tires as the cruiser climbed the hill. The radio crackled when he grabbed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7-3. I've got visible flames north of Ridge Road near mile marker 4. Possible structure fire. Request immediate response." Static swallowed the reply. Cell reception was spotty this deep in the valley. Didn't matter. He was already moving. The forest broke open into a small clearing, and the world exploded in color. A house on fire, the kind that roared with hunger. Flames clawed up the wooden siding, turning windows into squares of molten orange. The roof sagged, moaning under its own heat. Sparks drifted into the sky like lost stars. Daniel slammed the door open. The wall of heat hit him instantly, pushing the breath from his lungs. "Rex, stay!" But the shepherd bounded out beside him, barking against the inferno. The air tasted of ash and resin. Through the roar, a sound cut across the night. A child's cry, thin and terrified. "Help, please!" Daniel spun toward it. At the edge of the porch steps, framed by smoke and flame, stood a little girl, no older than 6. Her bare feet were gray with soot, her small arms wrapped around a baby swaddled in a blanket. Her nightdress clung wetly to her knees. Her face was streaked with tears and ash. Daniel raised a hand, voice steady though his heart thundered. Pitched first. "Hey, I'm Officer Ward. I'm gonna get you out, okay? Just don't move." The girl shook her head, coughing. "Daddy, he poured the gas. He's mad again." Her words tumbled out between sobs, barely audible over the crackle. "Okay, sweetheart. It's all right. We're going now." He darted up the steps. The porch groaned beneath him, boards already blackening. Heat seared through his uniform pants. He yanked off his jacket and wrapped it around the children, lifting both into his arms. The baby whimpered. The girl clung to his neck, fingers digging in. Behind him, Rex barked furiously, circling, searching for a clear path through the flames. A beam crashed beside them, showering sparks. Daniel ducked low and shouted, "Go, Rex! Out!" The dog bolted ahead, shouldering through the smoke until a sliver of night appeared beyond the wall of fire. Daniel followed, lungs burning, vision narrowing to a tunnel of orange and black. The porch collapsed the moment his boots hit the yard. He ran, half stumbling, clutching the children against his chest. The explosion came like thunder, wood, glass, and light bursting outward in a single violent breath. The shockwave flung heat against his back. He dove behind the patrol car, curling his body over the children. The baby cried. The girl screamed once for her mother, a sound so raw it sliced through every other noise. Then, silence. Only the hiss of rain beginning to fall. Daniel lifted his head. The house was gone, replaced by a skeletal frame glowing in the darkness. He could feel his heartbeat in his burned palms. Rex limped toward him through the smoke, fur singed, eyes wide and bright. The dog pressed his muzzle against the girl's small hand, as if checking that she still existed. "It's okay," Daniel rasped, though his throat felt lined with glass. "You're safe now." The girl trembled in his arms. "Mommy, she was working. She'll come home and—" Her sentence broke, replaced by sobs that shook her entire body. Daniel had no words. He just held her tighter, feeling the fragile heartbeat beneath the soot. Sirens wailed in the distance at last, growing louder, help finally finding them. Rex sat beside the cruiser, ears pinned back, staring at the dying fire as though daring it to move again. Rain hissed against the embers. For a long moment, Daniel simply knelt there, every muscle trembling, the children wrapped in his jacket, the world reduced to smoke and breath. When the first fire engine crested the hill, its lights washing the clearing red, Daniel whispered to no one, "Not again. Please, not again." But this time, he hadn't been too late. The flames bowed under the weight of the rain, and the night, though scarred, began to breathe. Sirens wailed once more, then thinned into the distance until the valley exhaled a long, broken silence. Only the soft percussion of rain remained, spattering against metal and ash. Daniel Ward stood a few yards from what had once been a home, watching as the last tongues of flame gnawed the timbers, refusing to die. Each hiss and crackle sounded like something breathing its final breath. Rex limped up beside him, paw singed, nose streaked with soot. The dog lowered his head, but didn't sit. He stared into the fire as if it were a living enemy. Daniel reached down, fingers brushing through the wet fur along Rex's neck. "Easy, boy," he whispered, voice scraped raw. The touch steadied them both. Behind them, red and blue lights painted the forest in pulses. Paramedics moved with quiet urgency around the cruiser, boots sinking into the mud. One of them cradled the baby, tiny, pale, wrapped in Daniel's smoke-stained jacket, and carried him toward the waiting ambulance. Another lifted the little girl onto a gurney, fastening the belt with hands gentler than rain. "Pulse steady," someone said. "Minor burns, smoke inhalation. We're good." Daniel nodded numbly, though no one had spoken to him. His sleeve was scorched halfway up his arm, uniform torn from when the porch collapsed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the ache of exhaustion and the faint tremor that always followed rescue, the body realizing what the mind still refused to feel. He looked at Emma, the child from the flames. Her lashes were clumped with soot, her cheeks streaked with tear tracks carved clean through the grime. Even now, half conscious, she held on to the corner of the blanket where her baby brother had lain, unwilling to let go. Something in that tiny gesture hollowed Daniel's chest. He'd seen victims before, car wrecks, shootings, overdoses, but nothing like this small defiance, this refusal to surrender love. It broke through the armor years of service had built. A medic brushed past him. "Officer, you need that arm looked at." "I'm fine." "Doesn't look fine." "I said I'm fine." The words came sharper than intended. The medic hesitated, then moved on. Daniel exhaled slowly, pressing his palm against the cruiser for balance. Steam rose from the hood where rain met heat. Up on the ridge, the storm clouds shifted, revealing a faint outline of an older man under a wide-brimmed hat. Walter Briggs watched the scene through binoculars, his gray beard shining wet under the lightning's flicker. A retired firefighter who never quite retired. Walter lived half a mile north, where the trees thinned into pasture. When he'd seen the sky glow orange, instinct had dragged him from his porch before thought could stop him. Now, through his lenses, he caught movement. A blue-green pickup truck jerking along the dirt road beyond the clearing. Lights off, tires throwing up mud. He didn't need to guess what that meant. "Damn fool," he muttered. He flipped open his weathered field notebook, the same one he'd carried for decades of fire reports, and wrote with a shaky hand, 11:47 p.m. Wind ESE, visibility low, vehicle leaving scene, blue-green pickup, no headlights. Direction, North Ridge Trail. The graphite smudged under raindrops, but the note stayed legible enough. Old habits, he thought, die slower than fire. He tucked the notebook back into his coat, eyes narrowing toward the road. Down below, Daniel finally sat. The adrenaline dump left him drained, trembling. He leaned against the ambulance bumper, boots half submerged in puddles, watching the rain eat the fire bit by bit. Rex settled beside him, panting heavily, one paw bandaged by a medic who'd worked in silence. For the first time since the explosion, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. Not the short, shallow gulps of panic, but a full breath that hurt on the way in. The acrid smoke still coated his throat, tasting of sap and sorrow. The paramedics prepared to leave. "We're taking the kids to Pine Valley General. You coming?" "In a minute." His voice was hoarse. "I'll follow." The ambulance doors closed with a hollow thud. The siren started again, softer this time, a fading lullaby that disappeared into the wet woods. And then there was nothing. Nothing except the crackle of cooling wood and the faint hum of rain. Daniel stared at the empty gurney tracks in the mud. He remembered another night, 15 years ago. Different fire. Same helpless roar. He'd been 17, trapped outside a burning trailer, screaming for a sister whose face he could still see through the window. Every call for help had vanished into the sound of collapsing metal. He pressed his hand over his eyes, but memory didn't dim. Tonight's smoke smelled the same helplessness, the same guilt. Only this time, 2 children were alive, and that truth steadied him like a hand on his shoulder. A soft tug on his sleeve pulled him back to the present. Emma was there again. She had slipped off the gurney before the medic could stop her. Barefoot, trembling, eyes too big for her face. Hey, you need to stay with the medics, sweetheart. She shook her head, silent for a long heartbeat. Then, barely above the rain, you came back for us. The words fell fragile, but they landed like weight. Daniel couldn't answer. His throat closed around whatever response tried to form. All he managed was a nod. The girl gave a tiny smile, half awake, half dreaming, and let the medic lift her again. As the ambulance doors shut for the second time, her small hand waved once through the glass, the gesture of a child who still believed in safety. When the lights disappeared over the hill, darkness returned. The fire had burned itself to embers. Thin smoke rose like ghosts among the trees. Rex shifted closer, resting his head against Daniel's knee. The warmth of the dog's weight pulled him back to earth. He reached down, tracing the edge of the bandage around Rex's paw. "Good work, partner," he murmured. "Real good." From the ridge, Walter watched until the last engine left, then turned toward home. The rain eased, leaving only mist. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine echoed faintly, the same one he'd written down. He tightened his jaw. Tomorrow, he thought, I'll tell the sheriff. Whoever ran from that fire won't stay hidden long. Below, Daniel rose at last. He stood before the ruins, shoulders slumped, uniform soaked. The smoke curled upward, twisting into the night sky, like a prayer without words. He didn't know who he was praying for, the dead, the living, or himself. He turned to leave, but before getting into his cruiser, he paused. The forest was utterly still now, the chaos spent. From the back of the ambulance, through memory, he could almost hear the soft breathing of a child who had survived because he hadn't stopped running. And for the first time in years, the sound of breathing, not the roar of fire, was what filled his head. The sterile glow of Pine Valley Hospital painted the world in shades of white and silence. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, smoke, and something sweetly artificial, like plastic flowers that had forgotten how to be alive. Outside the window, dawn hadn't yet arrived, but the horizon had begun to pale, and that faint gray light made everything inside feel both safe and unbearably fragile. Officer Daniel Ward stood in the doorway of room 214, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. His uniform clung to him, still damp from the rain, the fabric carrying the faint scent of ash no amount of scrubbing could erase. A bandage wrapped around his forearm, clean and white against the blackened bruises beneath. He didn't look at his arm, though. His eyes stayed fixed on the small figure lying in the hospital bed. Emma. The girl looked impossibly small against the wide white sheets. Her hair, freshly washed, curled damply around her face, still streaked with the faint gray shadow of smoke that even soap couldn't completely lift. She was clutching a soot-stained blanket, the one Daniel had wrapped around her in the fire. Nurses had offered her a new one, but she'd refused, holding on to the old one with the kind of loyalty children save for the things that saved them. On the tiled floor beside the bed lay Rex, curled in a protective arc. His breathing was steady but alert, golden eyes flicking toward every sound that broke the hospital's quiet rhythm. The squeak of a cartwheel, the distant beeping of machines, a cough from another room. Every time someone opened the door, Rex lifted his head, muscles tensing, until he recognized Daniel's scent. Then, with a faint sigh, he'd settle back down, muzzle resting against his paws. It wasn't supposed to look like this, Daniel thought. Not this quiet. Not this still. Fires ended loud, in chaos, in sirens, in shouting. But it was the silence after that always tore something open inside him. He moved closer to the bed, soft soles making no sound on the linoleum. His reflection floated faintly in the window glass beside Emma's. A man framed by fluorescent light, hollow-eyed and weary, staring at the fragile piece he couldn't seem to keep for himself. As he watched her sleep, memories began to seep through the cracks in his composure, like smoke through a door left ajar. He saw his sister, Lily, 12 years old, hair the color of honey, eyes the same hazel as his. The fire that took her wasn't supposed to happen either. A trailer fire in a small town that had forgotten about fire hydrants. He'd been outside when it started, running for help, pounding on neighbors' doors, screaming for someone to come. By the time they did, the roof had already folded in. The smell, that mix of melting plastic and wet pine, had haunted him since. That same smell clung to this room now, faint but real. It was the scent of everything he'd lost and everything he'd saved. Daniel drew in a shaky breath and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He pressed his fingers to his temples, forcing the ghosts back into the corners of his mind. But the harder he tried, the louder the past whispered. "You couldn't save her," it said. "You were too late." He looked at Emma again. The rise and fall of her chest, the way her small fingers twitched around the blanket. Not this time, he thought. A nurse entered quietly, checking the monitors. She smiled softly when she noticed Rex. "He hasn't left her side since you brought them in," she whispered. "It's like he knows she needs him." Daniel nodded. "He does." When the nurse left, the silence returned. It was broken only when Emma stirred. She blinked slowly, eyes glossy, under the sterile light. For a moment she looked lost, disoriented, caught between the nightmare and the waking world. Then her gaze found Daniel, and some small part of the fear seemed to ease. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "The fire's gone?" Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Yeah, sweetheart. It's all gone. You're safe now." Emma looked around the room, taking in the machines, the pale walls, the quiet. Her little brow furrowed. "Where's my mommy?" "She's coming," he said gently. "They're trying to reach her now." Emma nodded faintly, but tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She'll be scared if she doesn't know where we are." That one line cut deeper than any wound Daniel had ever carried. There was so much trust in it. The simple, desperate belief that somewhere out there, a mother's love was enough to fix everything broken in the world. He swallowed hard and forced his voice to stay steady. "I promise, Emma. She'll know. I'll make sure she knows exactly where you are." The little girl studied him, as if trying to decide whether she could believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You promise?" "I promise." It was just 2 words, easy, ordinary, but as he spoke them, something shifted in the air. A weight settled on him that he hadn't expected, not heavy, but real. He didn't know it yet, but that promise would change everything. Emma's eyelids drooped again, exhaustion dragging her back towards sleep. Before drifting off, she whispered something so quiet he almost didn't catch it. "You smell like smoke, but not bad smoke." Daniel smiled faintly. The first true smile since the night began. "That's a new one." She didn't answer. Her breathing slowed, soft and even, the faint squeak of the heart monitor keeping rhythm with the night. Rex lifted his head, looking from her to Daniel, then back again. The dog's amber eyes seemed to say what words couldn't. You keep your promise. She's ours now. Daniel reached down, scratching behind Rex's ear. I know, boy, he murmured. We will. He leaned back in the chair, eyes tracing the curve of the IV tube that glowed pale blue under the fluorescent light. The hum of the hospital surrounded him. Distant footsteps, a door creaking open, the muted chatter of nurses switching shifts. Outside the window, the first hint of dawn began to bleed into the horizon, washing the dark with silver. The night was finally ending. But Daniel knew it wasn't over. The fire was out, but its shadow would linger in the child's frightened eyes, in the mother's heartbreak he hadn't yet seen, and in the echo of his own guilt that refused to die. Still, for now, the room held peace. A fragile, trembling peace, but peace nonetheless. He closed his eyes, listening, not for sirens, not for fire, but for the steady breathing of a little girl who, by some grace, had survived the worst. And in that quiet, Daniel Ward, the man who had once believed he'd run out of second chances, finally found one waiting for him, in the soft glow of hospital light. The automatic doors of Pine Valley Hospital slid open with a hiss, spilling a slice of cold, fluorescent light into the damp dawn. A woman stumbled through. Her name was Laura Hayes, and she looked like she'd run a mile through hell. Her supermarket uniform was still on, blue polo shirt stained with coffee and sweat, the name tag barely hanging by one corner. Her hair, once neatly pinned back, had fallen loose in tangled strands around her face. Her chest heaved as she tried to speak to the nurse at the reception desk, voice breaking between sobs. My children, she gasped. They said there was a fire. Emma Hayes, 6 years old. Please tell me they're alive. The nurse hurried from behind the counter. Room 214, ma'am. They're safe. Please come with me. Laura didn't wait for more. She ran. Her shoes slapped against the sterile floor, the echoes following her down the corridor like thunder chasing lightning. The scent of antiseptic burned her throat, mixing with the ghost of smoke still hanging faintly in the air. When she reached the doorway, she froze. Inside, Emma lay sleeping, her small face peaceful under the white glow. The baby, Noah, was curled in a bassinet nearby, a thin IV running into his arm. And between them, like a silent guardian carved out of shadow, sat Rex, the German shepherd. The dog's eyes lifted instantly, alert, golden, watchful. Laura's knees gave out before her mind could catch up. She fell hard onto the tile, palms striking the floor, a raw sound tearing from her chest, half sob, half prayer. Oh my God! The commotion stirred Emma awake. The girl blinked, confused, then gasped. Mommy? Laura scrambled forward, arms trembling, gathering both children against her. Her tears fell fast, streaking the soot still clinging to Emma's skin. Baby, I'm here. I'm here, I'm so sorry. She kissed her daughter's forehead again and again, her hands moving frantically over her, as if checking that she was real, that both her children were whole. The weight of relief collapsed her voice into a whisper. I thought I lost you. I thought I lost you both. Daniel stood a few feet away, still in his chair, eyes low, hat resting in his hands. He knew better than to interrupt moments like this. Some reunions didn't need witnesses. They needed silence. But still, he couldn't look away. He saw the tremor in Laura's shoulders, the desperation in her hands as she held her children. And in that grief, he saw something familiar. A mirror of his own mother's face after his sister's fire. That same look, the one that said, I survived, but I'll never be the same. When Laura finally looked up, her eyes found him, red-rimmed, wide, questioning. You're the one who—" Her voice broke. "You saved them?" Daniel nodded once. "We just got there in time." My partner smelled the smoke. Her gaze flicked to Rex. The shepherd hadn't moved, but his tail swept the floor once in acknowledgement, as if accepting the gratitude quietly. Laura swallowed hard, tears trembling on her lashes. "If he ever touches my babies again," her tone hardened, jagged as glass, "I'll burn before I let it happen." The words hit the room like a match striking stone. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You won't have to. We'll make sure of that." She shook her head, bitterness edging the relief in her eyes. "You don't know him. Frank Doyle, my husband. He wasn't always like this. He used to sing to Emma. He'd fix broken things around the house, bring home candy from work. Then the layoffs came, the bills, the whiskey. It changed him." Her voice faltered. "He changed." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. Laura's fingers brushed Emma's hair, tucking it behind her ear. "The night before the fire, he promised he'd stop drinking. He said he'd make breakfast in the morning." She gave a hollow laugh, the kind that carried more pain than humor. "I believed him. I left for my shift. And now, his time was 500. She couldn't finish. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was guilt, and both of them knew its shape too well. Daniel took a small step closer. "You couldn't have known," he said quietly. Her eyes snapped to his. "Maybe not. But I should have seen it coming. Every bruise, every slammed door. God, I should have taken them and run." He had no answer for that. Because once, years ago, his own mother had said the same thing after the fire that took Lily. "I should have known. I should have done more." There was no comfort big enough for that sentence. Rex shifted, breaking the tension. The movement drew Emma's attention. The little girl lifted her head, eyes shining with childlike wonder. She reached out, hand small against the shepherd's massive muzzle. "He's brave," she whispered, "like Daddy used to be." Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He crouched beside her, voice soft. "He's brave because he believes we still can be." Emma smiled faintly, resting her hand on Rex's head. "Then maybe we'll be brave too." Laura watched the exchange, tears spilling again. But this time, there was something gentler in them. The beginning of healing, however fragile. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "For bringing them back to me." Daniel shook his head. "You thank him," he said, nodding toward Rex. "He's the one who wouldn't stop barking." Laura smiled through the tears. "Then thank you, Rex." The dog tilted his head slightly, as if understanding. For a moment, the room felt lighter. The shadows pulled back. Daniel thought maybe, just maybe, this family could still find peace after what the fire took. But peace, like flame, is fragile. Outside, a voice echoed from the hallway. A reporter, tone clipped and professional. "Authorities confirm early evidence of arson in the Pine Valley fire. Investigation ongoing." The words sliced through the stillness. Laura's head snapped toward the door. Her breath caught. Her hands tightened on Emma's shoulders. "Arson?" she whispered. "You mean he—" Daniel didn't answer right away. The look in her eyes said she already knew. Her voice trembled, barely audible. "He's still out there." The heart monitor's steady beep filled the silence that followed. Too loud. Too real. Daniel exchanged a glance with Rex, whose ears were already pricked toward the hallway. Somewhere out there, in the rain-soaked woods of Pine Valley, a man who had burned his home was still breathing, and the fire he'd started wasn't done yet. Daniel straightened slowly, jaw set, eyes hardening. "Then we'll find him," he said quietly. Rex rose beside him, muscles coiled, ready. Outside, dawn finally broke through the clouds, a pale, uncertain light spreading across the world that had survived the night. And inside room 214, under that fragile light, 3 survivors clung to one another, not knowing that the fire had only just begun to cast its longest shadow. The forest swallowed the road miles ago. Only the sound of rain on pine needles broke the silence as Frank Doyle stumbled through the mud, his boots sinking deep into the sodden earth. His clothes, once a workman's uniform from Blue Ridge Auto Supply, were now rags clinging to him, heavy with soot and sweat. His beard had grown wild, streaked with ash, and his hands trembled as he clutched a half-empty bottle of whiskey. He wasn't sure how long he'd been walking. Time had lost its edges. The fire had eaten it all. Ahead, through the dripping trees, a derelict hunting cabin slouched against the hillside. The windows were gone, the door half off its hinges. Smoke stains climbed its walls like fingerprints from ghosts. Frank stared at it for a long moment before pushing inside. The air was cold and smelled of mildew and burnt wood. In the corner stood an old stove, rusted through. A tattered mattress lay collapsed on the floor. He dropped onto it, the springs groaning beneath his weight, and tipped the whiskey bottle to his lips. The burn was sharp, bitter, undeserved. "Didn't mean to hurt them," he muttered into the dark. "Didn't mean nothing. Just wanted quiet." The words echoed off the empty walls, flat and hollow. He said them again, softer this time, as if repetition might turn them into truth. Outside, the rain thickened. Inside, Frank stared at the burned photograph he'd carried in his pocket. The paper was curled and brittle, the image half-eaten by flame. Still, he could make out Laura's face, smiling faintly, her arm around Emma, who had been missing a front tooth that day. Behind them, the old house stood whole and bright. He rubbed his thumb across the picture until the ashes smeared his skin. His breath hitched, and the bottle slipped from his grasp, rolling across the floorboards with a dull clink. Then came the flashbacks, the ones that wouldn't stop. The factory manager's voice, cold and bored. "Sorry, Doyle, we're cutting hours again." The landlord's letter, stamped, "Final notice." The sound of Noah crying at 3 a.m., endless and sharp as broken glass. And Laura's words, tired and quiet. "Frank, please, not tonight. Not again." Each memory hit like a hammer blow. He saw himself slamming the door, muttering curses, reaching for the bottle. Then the smell of gasoline, the flick of a lighter, the sudden, roaring light, the scream that followed. Frank pressed both hands against his ears, rocking back and forth on the mattress. "Didn't mean it," he whispered again. "Didn't mean it." His voice cracked on the last word. He could still feel the heat, the way it had chased him into the yard, the way it had turned night into day. He thought they'd all been gone, asleep. That's what he told himself over and over. That was the lie he needed to breathe. But the image of Emma, standing in the doorway clutching the baby, burned behind his eyes every time he closed them. The sight of her face when she saw him holding the match. The horror. The betrayal. He buried his head in his hands and sobbed until his body had nothing left to give. At the same time, miles away, the fire site was a graveyard of smoke and silence. Officer Daniel Ward stepped carefully through the ruins, boots crunching over glass and charred wood. The smell still clung to everything, thick, oily, final. He pulled his collar higher against the wind, eyes scanning the blackened skeleton of what had been the Whitmore house. Beside him, Rex moved low and deliberate, nose to the ground. Every so often, the shepherd would stop, sniff, and glance back, as if to say, "Here, something's wrong here." Fire investigators worked quietly in the background, scraping debris into metal trays, murmuring about accelerants and flashpoints. Their flashlights painted brief halos of light that vanished as quickly as they came. Daniel crouched near what used to be the living room. His gloved hand brushed aside wet ash, uncovering the twisted frame of a coffee table, the melted remains of toys. Beneath them, a faint metallic glint caught his eye. "Rex," he said softly. "Hold." The dog stopped instantly, muscles stiff. Daniel brushed away more debris. His fingers closed around something solid and cold. A Zippo lighter. Its surface blackened but intact. He turned it in his palm. The faint engraving along the side read, "FD." He didn't need to guess whose it was. His stomach tightened, rage and grief tangling inside him. He straightened, staring at the ruin around him. The home, the toys, the walls that had once held laughter. And somewhere inside that ruin, he saw himself again. 17. Standing outside another burning building, another person he couldn't save. Only this time, it wasn't his sister's life replaying in the flames. It was the life of a little girl who'd looked at him with absolute trust. He closed his fist around the lighter until the edges bit into his skin. "Sir." Daniel turned. Captain Hendricks, the lead investigator, held a clipboard streaked with rain. "Preliminary readings confirm accelerant. Gasoline likely poured across the floor. Whoever did this wanted the whole place gone." Daniel nodded grimly. "Frank Doyle." Hendricks frowned. "You sure?" Daniel opened his hand, showing the lighter. The initials gleamed faintly beneath the soot. That was answer enough. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of rain hitting ember. Then Rex barked once, short and low, alerting them. Daniel followed the dog's gaze toward the tree line. A figure was climbing the ridge in the distance. Walter Briggs, the retired firefighter. His raincoat was dark with water, his gait steady despite his age. Walter reached them, breath visible in the cold air. In his hand he held a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a torn receipt, edges damp but readable. "Found this up by Ridge Trail," he said, voice roughened by years of smoke. "Liquor store. Timestamp puts it less than an hour before the fire. Signature says Frank Doyle." Daniel took the bag, eyes narrowing. "So he's on the move." Walter shook his head slowly. "No, son. Look at the map." He tapped his finger against the ridge line behind them. "Those tire tracks I saw last night. They weren't heading out. They were looping back toward Blue Hollow." Daniel frowned. "Why come back?" Walter's eyes darkened. "Because men like him don't run. They circle the flame until it burns them clean." The wind rose, scattering ashes into the air like snow. Daniel looked down at the lighter again, the initials gleaming faintly through soot, and something cold settled inside him. Walter's voice came again, quiet, almost lost beneath the rain. "He's not running," he said. "He's circling back." The words lingered long after the wind carried them away. The storm came in low and mean over the hills, a rolling wall of gray that swallowed the stars and brought the forest to its knees. Thunder growled somewhere far off, and the trees shuddered under the weight of wind and rain. Pine Valley Forest had always been quiet after dark, but tonight, it pulsed with something uneasy. The kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Officer Daniel Ward moved through the mud with a flashlight in one hand and his other resting on Rex's collar. The dog's muscles were taut beneath his wet fur, every movement sharp, focused, alert. Behind them, Deputy Nate Callahan and Deputy Ray Duncan trudged through the storm, their lights weaving across the trunks like ghosts searching for shape. "Visibility's dropping fast," Callahan muttered, pulling his hood tighter against the wind. "If he's out here, we'll lose the trail before dawn." "We won't lose it," Daniel said, his voice low, certain. He kept his eyes on the dark line of trees ahead. "Rex has him." The shepherd lifted his nose to the air, nostrils flaring. The rain hit his back in steady sheets, but he didn't flinch. He moved forward a few paces, then stopped, paw pressing into the mud, tail stiff. Daniel followed his line of sight. Beyond the beam of his flashlight, the forest stretched endlessly, the kind of darkness that felt alive. "Talk to me, boy," Daniel whispered. Rex let out a soft growl, not of warning, but of certainty. He had the scent. Daniel signaled to the deputies. "Fan out! Stay within 50 yards! He's close!" The men split, their flashlights cutting through the fog like blades. The smell of wet pine mixed with something else, something faint and chemical beneath the rain. Daniel's jaw tightened. He recognized it instantly. Gasoline. The storm wind shifted, carrying the scent stronger now, sharp and unnatural against the clean smell of rain. He slowed, raising a hand. "Hold up," Callahan's voice crackled through the radio. "You smell that too?" "Yeah," Daniel replied. "We're walking into it." The rain thickened, hitting their faces like cold needles. Lightning flashed, painting the forest in a quick, silver light, and for a heartbeat, Daniel saw it. A dark trail of liquid snaking along the ground, seeping into the mud. It shimmered under the lightning. Gasoline. Fresh. "Damn it!" Daniel whispered. Rex barked once, sharp and tense. His hackles were raised now, his head low, ears course forward. The air around them seemed to thrum with danger. Elsewhere in the forest, a pair of old headlights struggled against the storm. Walter Briggs gripped the wheel of his truck, squinting through the sheets of rain. The wipers thudded back and forth, smearing more water than they cleared. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Beside him sat Rusty, his aging shepherd mix wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The dog's muzzle was white with age, but his eyes still gleamed with loyalty. "Storm like this, and I'm still out chasing ghosts," Walter muttered, voice rough. The truck bounced over a rut, tires spitting mud. "Guess some men never learn." He reached out and scratched Rusty's neck. The old dog licked his hand, tail thumping weakly against the seat. "One last fire to put out," Walter said softly. "Just one more, old friend." The forest road narrowed ahead, roots breaking through the dirt, puddles glimmering in the flashes of lightning. The radio on his dash hissed static, picking up fragments of Daniel's voice through the interference. "North Ridge. Suspect possibly armed." Walter frowned. "He's closer than I thought." He turned onto the side trail, a path almost forgotten, overgrown but still navigable for someone who knew the land like he did. Rainwater cascaded down the slope, and branches whipped against the windshield. The headlights caught the faint glimmer of footprints in the mud, heavy, dragging, uneven. Rusty whined softly. Walter leaned closer to the glass. "Yeah, I see it too. He's not just running. He's staggering. Maybe hurt. Maybe drunk." He killed the engine, letting the storm swallow the noise, and grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment. "Come on, boy." The two stepped into the night, the wind tearing at their coats. Walter pulled the collar up around his neck and moved carefully down the slope. Rusty stayed close, limping slightly, but steady. The rain came harder now. It turned the dirt road into a ribbon of mud, washing away footprints as fast as they were made. But the old firefighter knew how to read more than tracks. He could read the air, the way it carried the weight of heat, smoke, and regret. Somewhere ahead, faint and low, came a voice. "Fire fixes everything." Walter froze. Rusty stiffened beside him, ears pricked. The voice came again, closer this time. Rough, broken, threaded with madness. "Didn't mean to hurt them, but the fire, it cleans." Walter's pulse quickened. He raised his flashlight, its beam catching on something metallic through the trees, the gleam of a gas can swinging from a man's hand. "Frank," Walter whispered. "Oh, God." He turned toward Rusty. "Go warn them, boy. Go find the officers." The old dog hesitated, whined. "Go," Walter urged. Rusty took off into the dark, his form disappearing between the trees. Back with Daniel, Rex suddenly lifted his head, nose twitching. He barked once, then twice, urgent, sharp. Daniel turned just as lightning flashed again, and in that split second, he saw him. A man stumbling through the rain, soaked to the bone, a gas can in one hand and a lighter in the other. His eyes were wild, unfocused. His voice drifted through the storm, hoarse and broken. "Fire fixes everything, makes it clean again." "Frank!" Daniel shouted over the wind. "Drop it!" Frank didn't seem to hear. He staggered forward, muttering to himself, staring up at the sky as if the thunder were answering him. The rain ran down his face like tears. Rex growled low, every muscle ready to spring. Daniel raised his hand to steady him, stepping closer, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the storm. "Frank, you don't want to do this," he called again. "Put it down." Frank laughed, a raw, broken sound that twisted into the thunder. "You can't stop it. Fire don't care. It just takes what it's owed." Lightning cracked overhead, blinding white. The air shuddered, and for a heartbeat, Daniel smelled it stronger than ever. The sharp reek of gasoline mixing with the rain, seeping into the ground beneath his boots. "Move!" he yelled, yanking Rex back just as the ground around them hissed. The puddles shimmered with a rainbow sheen, fuel floating on the surface. Rex's eyes glowed amber in the flash of lightning, locked on the silhouette of the man ahead. Every instinct in him screamed danger. Daniel raised his voice above the storm, gun in hand, but his heart pounding with something heavier than fear, something that felt like inevitability. The forest roared with thunder. Rain pounded the earth. And through it all, Frank Doyle stood like a ghost in the storm, whispering his prayer to the flames he hadn't yet lit. The storm had turned the world to steel. Blue Hollow Lake stretched out under a bruised sky, its surface beaten flat by sheets of rain that lashed sideways in unrelenting fury. Each lightning strike carved the night into brief, violent clarity. The black pines flashing white, the cabin by the water glinting like a wet scar against the storm. Inside that cabin, Frank Doyle sat hunched on the floor near a dying fire. His soaked flannel clung to him like skin, his hands trembling as he turned a silver Zippo lighter over and over. In the other hand, he held a pistol, the barrel cold against his temple. His breath came in short bursts, fogging the air in front of him. "Didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered to no one. "Didn't mean for it to burn like that. Just wanted it quiet. Just quiet." The walls groaned under the weight of the wind. Water dripped steadily through a hole in the ceiling, sizzling when it hit the fire's last ember. The smell of whiskey and gasoline hung thick, a dangerous perfume of despair. A photo lay on the floorboards beside him. Laura and Emma, smiling in sunlight. Half the picture was burned away, leaving only Laura's eyes staring through the singed paper, her smile twisted by the scorch. Frank's fingers brushed the edge of the photo, trembling harder now. "I loved you," he whispered, voice breaking. "I swear I did." You don't believe me, but I did. He tilted the bottle, the last drops of whiskey spilling down his chin. The lighter clicked open. The small flame wavered, trembling like his resolve. Maybe fire's the only thing that makes sense anymore, he murmured. Takes what's broken, makes it clean. Outside, the storm hammered against the world. Officer Daniel Ward crouched low behind a slick boulder, his jacket plastered to his skin. Water ran down his face, pooling beneath his collar. But he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the cabin ahead, its single window flickering with light. Beside him, Rex growled low, a deep, primal rumble that vibrated through the mud. His ears were flat, his amber eyes fixed. He could smell the man inside, the whiskey, the fear, the oil. Behind Daniel, Deputy Callahan whispered, "We've got one shot at this. If he's wired the place, we'll be fireworks by dawn." Daniel wiped rain from his brow. "We move on my mark. No loud approach. He's on the edge. One wrong move and he'll light it himself." Rex pressed forward, nostrils flaring. Another scent cut through the storm. Not just smoke and oil, but blood. Faint but fresh. Daniel tensed. He's hurt. Means he's desperate. Across the ridge, a pair of old headlights flickered through the trees. Walter Briggs had parked his truck half a mile back, hiking the rest of the way through mud that sucked at his boots. His flashlight beam wavered as he climbed down the slope toward the lake. Rusty, his old shepherd mix, trudged beside him, fur-drenched, eyes bright, even in exhaustion. "Damn fool," Walter muttered under his breath. "Could have stayed home. Could have let the young ones handle it. But no. One last fire to put out." He stopped at the tree line, breathing hard, peering through the rain toward the cabin. The flicker of firelight glowed faintly inside. Walter's gut twisted. "You poor bastard," he whispered. "What have you done?" Rusty whined softly, tail low, sensing the tension. Walter knelt, placing a hand on the dog's neck. "Easy now. We ain't heroes, boy. Just witnesses." Lightning split the sky again, and in that flash both he and Daniel caught sight of each other from opposite sides of the clearing. Daniel lifted his hand in silent recognition. They didn't need words. They were converging on the same tragedy, from different lifetimes. Inside the cabin, Frank's monologue had become a storm of its own. He pressed the gun tighter to his head, rocking slightly. "You think you can judge me? You think you know what it's like?" His voice broke, turning wild. "Work your hands raw just to come home to crying and debt and empty bottles. Nobody listens. Nobody—" He slammed his fist into the floor, the gun clattering loose. "I didn't mean for it to catch." He buried his face in his arms, sobbing. The lighter still burned, its tiny flame reflecting in his tear-wet eyes. Outside the window, Rex stiffened, body coiled. A deep growl rolled from his chest. Daniel followed his gaze, and through the glass, illuminated by firelight, he saw Frank. The gun had found its way back to the man's temple. Daniel's throat tightened. "No!" He lifted his voice just above the rain. "Frank, please, don't!" Frank's head jerked toward the sound, confusion flickering across his face. For a split second, their eyes met through the glass. Two men bound by loss, both chasing a piece they couldn't find. Then everything moved at once. Daniel kicked the door open. The sound exploded through the cabin. "Drop it, Frank!" The man spun, startled, the pistol trembling in his hand. The lightning flash was blinding, followed by the deafening crack of gunfire. The bullet sliced through the air, grazing Daniel's arm. The pain was instant, sharp, but he didn't stop. Before Frank could aim again, Rex launched forward, a blur of muscle and instinct. He hit Frank full force, jaws clamping around his wrist just as the trigger pulled again. The gun went off, the shot shattering the oil lamp beside the stove. Glass burst. Fire roared. The lighter slipped from Frank's hand, tumbling across the floor, landing against a pile of whiskey-soaked rags. The spark caught. The flames surged upward, orange and hungry, devouring the air with a hiss. "Shadow! Off!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Frank by the collar. The man struggled weakly, cursing, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. "Let me go," Frank rasped. "Let it burn. I deserve it." "Not tonight," Daniel snarled, dragging him toward the door. The heat rolled behind them, choking, alive. The flames licked the ceiling, climbing faster than he could move. Outside, Walter saw the glow flare through the windows. His stomach dropped. "Come on, son," he muttered. "Get out of there." Rex bounded out first, shaking ash from his coat, barking desperately. Daniel stumbled after him, half dragging, half carrying Frank's limp body through the mud. Behind them, the cabin erupted, a boom that tore the rain apart. The explosion sent sparks and timber flying into the lake, fire meeting water in a violent hiss. They hit the ground hard. Daniel rolled, shielding Frank as debris rained down around them. For a moment, the world was only thunder, fire, and rain. Then the roar began to fade. Frank lay sprawled in the mud, coughing smoke, face pale and streaked with soot. Daniel's arm bled freely, but he didn't notice. He grabbed the man by the shirt and pulled him upright. "Look at me!" he shouted over the storm. "You started the fire, but you don't get to end it." Frank's eyes fluttered open, dull, defeated. "Why'd you save me?" Daniel's voice was quiet now, steady, cutting through the rain. "Because no more fires, Frank. Not tonight." Lightning tore across, the lake again. And for a fleeting second, the scene froze. Two men kneeling in the mud, one broken by guilt, the other refusing to let him drown in it. Behind them, the burning cabin collapsed in on itself, flames reflected in the mirrored water like a final confession. The fire had consumed the man who created it, but it hadn't taken everything. Not this time. The storm had no mercy left to give. Rain fell harder now, thick and cold, drowning what remained of the cabin fire. The flames hissed and shrank, curling into smoke that clung to the wet earth like ghosts too tired to rise. Each drop struck the mud with the sound of 1,000 tiny goodbyes. Frank Doyle lay face down in the muck, his breath ragged, his body trembling as if the fire were still inside him. His hands clawed weakly at the ground before falling still. Smoke streaked his hair and skin. He was sobbing now, not the kind of tears that cleanse, but the kind that tear a man apart from the inside out. "I didn't mean for them to die," he rasped. The words came in broken pieces. "I just wanted quiet. I just wanted quiet." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the rain, whispering through the blackened trees. Then Daniel Ward stepped closer, his boots sinking deep into the mud beside him. He knelt, blood dripping from the tear in his sleeve where the bullet had grazed him. His voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. "Then listen now," he said. "It's quiet." Frank lifted his head slightly, eyes red and hollow. The forest was still, save for the storm. The fire was gone. The rage, the noise, the chaos, all swallowed by the sound of rain against the lake. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "You're still alive." Frank blinked, as if the words didn't make sense. His chest heaved with another sob, his face contorting under the weight of guilt too heavy for one man to bear. "Alive," he echoed. "Don't deserve to be." Daniel didn't answer. There were no words that could bridge the space between sin and survival, only the silence that follows both. Rex stood nearby, soaked and shivering, watching them. His amber eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, waiting for a command that didn't come. The dog's fur was caked with ash, his flank streaked with mud, but he held his head high, ever vigilant, as though guarding something sacred in this ruin. A few feet away, Walter Briggs emerged from the tree line, moving slowly, painfully. The rain plastered his gray hair to his forehead, and his flashlight swung weakly in one hand. Rusty, his old shepherd mix, limped beside him, tail dragging through the mud. Walter took one step too many. His leg buckled, sending him to his knees with a sharp cry. "Walter!" Daniel shouted, rushing over. He caught the old man before he hit the ground fully, easing him back against a fallen log. Blood stained Walter's sleeve where a branch had gouged his arm, and his breath came in wheezing bursts. "I'm all right," Walter murmured, wincing. Just the years catching up, that's all." Rusty whined softly and pressed his head into Walter's lap. The old man smiled faintly, his fingers tracing the dog's ear. "You did good, old boy. Real good." Daniel crouched beside them, checking the wound. "We'll get you to a medic. Just hold on." Walter's hand closed around his wrist. "Don't fuss over me, son." "Seen worse?" Daniel looked up, rain dripping from his chin. "You shouldn't have been out here. You could have been killed." Walter's mouth twitched into something halfway between a smirk and a grimace. "So could you. Guess we're both too stubborn to quit." They sat there for a while, saying nothing. The forest exhaled around them, steam rising from the dying fire. In the distance, sirens began to echo, faint at first, then stronger, winding their way through the rain-soaked valley. Help was coming, too late for the cabin, but just in time for what was left of its ghosts. Frank had stopped struggling. He knelt a few yards away, his head bowed, hands clasped around nothing. His eyes stared at the mud, but they didn't see it. He looked like a man emptied of everything, rage, grief, even fear. Only the hollow remained. Walter followed Daniel's gaze to him. "You ever wonder," he said quietly, "why some fires burn out and others keep finding their way back?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Because some people never stop striking the match." Walter nodded. "Maybe, but sometimes, son, the match is already burning before they ever touch it." Daniel didn't answer. He was too tired to argue with wisdom that old. The rain eased slightly, the storm losing its fury, retreating toward the mountains. Walter's breathing grew shallow. Rusty stayed pressed close to him, his tail thumping weakly in the mud every few seconds, a quiet rhythm of loyalty. When Walter spoke again, his voice was thin, trembling between exhaustion and peace. "You remind me of your father, you know." Daniel's head snapped up. "You knew him?" Walter smiled faintly. "John Ward, fire chief back in '93. Best man I ever worked with." Daniel froze. The name hit like lightning. You were there? The warehouse fire?" Walter nodded. "Yeah. He pulled me out. Saved my life. Roof came down before he could get clear." His eyes glistened with something that wasn't rain. "Been trying to earn that ever since." Daniel swallowed hard. The storm outside nothing compared to the one rising in his chest. Walter's gaze drifted toward the lake, where smoke still curled faintly above the water. "Your father would have done the same tonight," he whispered. "Run into the flames, pulled a lost soul out, even if the world said he didn't deserve saving." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Rex padded closer, sitting beside Daniel, his body pressed against his leg. On the other side, Rusty laid his head on Walter's knee, his tail still giving that small, steady wag. Two dogs, one young, one old, standing guard over the men who had carried the weight of fire their whole lives. The rain slowed to a mist. The wind softened. Frank's voice broke the silence. "Do you think she'll ever forgive me?" Daniel turned to look at him. The man's face was streaked with soot and tears, his eyes empty but searching. "I don't know," Daniel said honestly, "but you're still breathing. That's the start." Frank bowed his head. "Then maybe that's punishment enough." Walter coughed softly, wincing. "No, son. Punishment's what you live through. Redemption's what you choose." The old man leaned his head back against the log, closing his eyes. Rusty whined again, pawing at his sleeve. Daniel's heart clenched. "Stay with me, Walter. Paramedics are almost here." Walter smiled faintly. "I'll be fine. Just tired." His hand found Daniel's shoulder, grip surprisingly strong for a man so worn. "The fire's out, son. Don't let it start again. Not in you." Then his hand fell away, resting lightly against Rusty's fur. Daniel looked out over the lake. The last embers on the shore sputtered and died, their glow fading into darkness. The fire had burned through everything: guilt, anger, sin. What remained was only truth. A man who had caused the flames, another who refused to let them win, and an old firefighter who had finally laid his burden down. And above them, for the first time in a long time, the rain stopped falling. 3 months had passed since the night the flames devoured Hollow Creek. 3 months since the storm, the rescue, and the sound of fire meeting rain. The seasons had turned. Summer's weight had lifted, leaving Pine Valley brushed in early autumn gold. But inside the county courthouse, the air was still heavy, thick with the echoes of what could never be undone. The oak-paneled courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and coffee gone cold. Rain tapped softly at the windows, a gentler echo of the storm that had changed them all. At the front of the room, Frank Doyle stood between two officers. His orange prison uniform hung loose on him now, too large for a man who'd lost both weight and will. His hands were shackled in front of him, his posture slumped. The defiance that once flashed in his eyes had burned out long ago. His face was pale, his skin drawn tight across the bones. Every movement looked slow, deliberate, as though the air itself had turned thick. He stared straight ahead, expression blank, while the judge's voice carried through the stillness. "Frank Doyle," the judge said, his tone low but firm. "This court finds you guilty of arson, attempted manslaughter, and illegal possession of flammable materials. The evidence, including your confession, leaves no doubt as to your actions." Frank didn't move. The words slid past him like rain down glass. The judge continued, the rhythm of justice precise, merciless. "You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. May this serve as both consequence and closure to all who were harmed by your choices." The gavel struck once. The sound echoed like thunder, final, unyielding. No one in the room spoke for a moment. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. From her seat, in the front row, Laura Hayes bowed her head. Her hands trembled as they clutched her daughter's. Emma's small fingers wrapped around her mother's palm like a lifeline. Laura's eyes were rimmed red, her body tense, but her face held no hatred, only exhaustion. Emma sat still beside her, legs dangling off the bench, her white dress too formal for a child so young. She looked at the man standing at the front, the man who used to fix her tricycle and read bedtime stories, before the smell of whiskey took his place. He didn't look like her stepfather anymore. He looked like someone hollowed out by the thing he'd tried to control. When the bailiff stepped forward to escort him away, Frank turned his head, just slightly. His gaze drifted across the courtroom, over the faces of strangers, over Laura's bent shoulders, and finally, to Daniel Ward, standing quietly at the back. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Daniel stood tall in his police uniform, his hat tucked under his arm. The wound on his arm had healed into a thin scar that peeked from beneath his sleeve. His posture was rigid, but his face betrayed something softer. Pity, perhaps, or something like it. Frank's mouth moved. The words were barely visible, but Daniel read them all the same. "Tell her I'm sorry." Daniel didn't nod. He didn't speak, but something inside him eased. The faintest recognition that even the damned could still reach for forgiveness, even if they never found it. The deputies took Frank by the arms and led him away. The chain at his wrists rattled, like faint applause for a tragedy's final act. As the door closed behind him, the sound of it struck Daniel harder than the gavel had, not because it marked justice, but because it marked an ending, one that didn't feel like victory. He exhaled, slowly, shoulders sinking as he watched the courtroom empty. The people filed out in silence, their faces drawn with a kind of reverence, as though they'd witnessed not a trial, but a requiem. Laura stood, pulling Emma to her feet. She turned once toward Daniel, her eyes finding his across the distance. There were no words, only that look, heavy with gratitude and grief intertwined. Then Emma did something that broke the silence clean in half. She turned too, looked right at Daniel, and smiled. It wasn't big or bright. It was small, soft. The kind of smile that carried 1,000 unspoken things. A silent thank you for saving her, for keeping his promise, for showing that not all fires end in destruction. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He managed a faint nod in return, his heart thudding in that familiar way. Not with adrenaline this time, but with the quiet ache that comes after everything has burned down, and you're left standing among the ashes, wondering what it all meant. He turned his gaze toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. Light broke through the clouds, striking the courthouse steps and turning the wet pavement to glass. The world looked cleaner somehow. Not fixed, never fixed, but softer. Behind him, the courtroom door creaked open again. Walter Briggs stood there, leaning on a cane. His arm was still bandaged from the night of the fire, but his eyes carried their old spark. "Didn't think I'd miss this," Walter said, his voice hoarse but steady. Daniel managed a half smile. "You shouldn't be out walking yet." "Doctors said rest," Walter replied. "But hell, I've been resting for 30 years. Time I showed up for something that mattered." He moved closer, lowering himself slowly onto a bench. "You did good, son. Not everyone would have pulled that man out." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't deserve saving. Walter gave a tired chuckle. "Maybe not. But you didn't do it for him, did you?" Daniel looked away, silent. Walter's gaze softened. "Redemption doesn't always belong to the guilty. Sometimes it belongs to the ones who choose compassion, when it costs them most." The words settled between them like a benediction. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and distant pine through the open door. Somewhere beyond the courthouse, life went on. Cars passing, children laughing, leaves turning gold. Daniel stood for a long while, his reflection faint in the polished floor. the echo of Walter's words still in his ears. He thought of Laura, of Emma's smile, of Rex waiting in the patrol car outside, and for the first time in years, he felt something like peace. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Because maybe redemption wasn't about saving everyone. Maybe it was about not letting the darkness win. Not in others, and not in yourself. He took one last look at the empty courtroom, the space where fire had been answered by mercy, and walked into the light, spilling across the floor. The sun had returned to Blue Hollow Lake, gentle and golden against the rippling water. The storm was gone now, replaced by soft winds carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. On the hill stood a new white-trimmed cottage. Where there had once been ruin, laughter now drifted across the meadow. Laura Hayes knelt in the garden, her hands steady in the dark soil where lilies bloomed. Behind her, Emma ran barefoot through the grass, chasing Rex, whose tail blurred with joy. Little Noah stumbled after them, squealing with delight. Rex slowed, circling protectively around the boy, his scar hidden beneath sunlit fur. Laura looked up, smiling, her first unshadowed smile in years. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Daniel Ward approached, out of uniform now, dressed simply, the hardness in his eyes softened by healing. "Morning," he called. "Morning, officer." He smiled. "Just Daniel now." She nodded. "That suits you better." He paused, taking in the cottage, the children, the lake below. "You've done a lot with this place." "We had to start somewhere," she said. "Figured this was as good as any." Daniel looked toward the calm water, the same place where fire had met flame and nearly ended them all. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Laura's voice softened. "You brought light back into our lives. You and Rex." The words struck deep. Before he could answer, Emma ran up, cheeks flushed, holding a folded paper. "I made you something!" Daniel knelt as she handed it over. A crayon drawing of a woman, a man, a little girl, and a big brown dog beneath a shining sun. Above them, in crooked letters, "God sent you before the fire so we could still see the light." His throat tightened. "Maybe he sent you to remind me, too." "Remind you of what?" Emma asked. "Time 400 pounds. That even when everything burns," he said softly, "the light still finds a way back." "Rex says you're right," she giggled, patting the shepherd's head. Rex barked once, tail sweeping the grass. Laura laughed from the porch. "He always agrees with the right person." Daniel tucked the drawing into his jacket. "Smarter than most people I know." They stood together watching the children play, Emma tossing a stick into the lake, Noah clapping as Rex bounded after it. Sunlight shimmered across the water like threads of gold. Laura's tone turned quiet. "Do you ever think about the fire?" "Every day," he said, "but not like before." "Good. Some things you don't forget. You just learn to live beside them." He nodded. "You've done more healing than any of us." She smiled. "I just stopped looking at what I lost and started seeing what's still here." Rex splashed back to shore, showering them all with water and laughter. The world felt whole again. As Daniel turned to leave, Laura called, "You'll come back, won't you?" He smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Down by the lake, sunlight danced across water and laughter carried through the air. Proof that some fires destroy, others purify, and sometimes, from the ashes, love learns to breathe again. When we look at a dog like Rex, loyal, brave, and full of heart, we're reminded that love doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in the steady rhythm of paws beside us, the quiet comfort of eyes that never judge, and the simple joy of being seen, truly seen. German shepherds have a way of showing us the best parts of ourselves: courage, devotion, and forgiveness. They ask for so little, and yet they give us everything. Trust, purpose, companionship that feels almost sacred. If stories like this one make you hold your own dog a little closer tonight, maybe that's the point. And if you'd like to deepen that bond, there's a wonderful resource I've been exploring myself, something that helps you understand your dog's heart, not just their habits. I'll leave the link here if you'd like to take a look. No pressure, just something worth sharing between dog lovers. Because in the end, it's not about training, it's about connection. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful thing we'll ever learn.